I'm Karen Horting, the Executive Director and CEO of the Society of Women Engineers. Welcome to Diverse, a SWE podcast. On today's episode, I'm thrilled to be here for this fireside chat with Dr. Carlotta Berry. Carlotta is a professor in the Department of Electrical and Computer Engineering at Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology and the founder of NoireSTEMinist. Carlotta and I were both recently recognized on the 2024 Forbes 50 over 50 list, which celebrates women who are shattering age and gender norms and making a significant impact in their fields. And both of us are in the innovation category to boot. I'm excited to dive into our conversation about our journeys, our work to increase STEM access, and the lessons we've learned along the way. Carlotta, welcome to Diverse.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
So, Carlotta, you've had an impressive career as a robotics expert and an educator. Could you introduce yourself to our listeners and share what inspired you to pursue a career in robotics and engineering?
Absolutely. My journey started in high school. I really loved math and science, and I always aspired to be a math teacher, just like my mom's a teacher, my grandmother was a teacher. And when in high school, I had a career counselor go, "You really should consider engineering." Me being very naive, not having any idea how small the numbers were for women or for Black women, I said, "Sure, why not?" And so I went to the library, no real internet yet. I looked up engineer and I was like, okay, I kind of understand what it's telling me. Don't really know, because in my mind, engineer is a train conductor. But I decided I'll give engineering a try anyway. So I ended up getting two bachelor's degrees, a dual degree program from Spelman College and Georgia Tech in mathematics and electrical engineering. And that way I could feed into both my loves. The robotics came later when I was an intern at Ford Motor Company, and they had industrial robotics. And then I took a mobile robotics course while at Georgia Tech. And I feel like electrical engineering and robotics really does feed into my interests, which are math and controls, because all of those are very math heavy as well. So I'm able to satisfy that need by being a roboticist. I've since also learned that robotics is great for multidisciplinary connections. So many disciplines do robotics. And so my goal to diversify STEM can be met with a robot, because a robot does touch on so many aspects of our lives.
And can I just delve a little bit more when you said you didn't realize the low numbers? So can you talk about when you got there, you looked around and you said, oh my, was there a moment
Absolutely.
of what was I thinking? How am I going to do this?
Absolutely. So Spelman College is a small, historically Black liberal arts all women's college in Atlanta, Georgia. Most of my professors were women, although not all Black. And so it was a very small, very family friendly, inclusive environment, very encouraging. Everyone knew your name, no classes over 30 students. And then I arrive at Georgia Tech and I walk in a lecture hall with 200 other students, and the professor looked like an ant in the front of the room. There weren't any real professor office hours. You had to go to one of the grad students' teaching assistants. And I looked around the room. No matter what, there was probably never more than 4 or 5 women, never more than 4 or 5 Black people. And I was just like, what happened? I think more than being the only woman or person of color, what was most jarring for me was having professors who just no longer had that personal touch. There was no more hello Carlotta when I arrived in class, knowing who your roommate was, seeking you out if you didn't do well on an exam. I just really felt like a number, I'll be honest. So yeah, it was lonely being one of only a few women, but if I could even have felt that sense of belonging, that sense of community, being supported, even if they weren't a woman, I think it would have made all the difference. I know affinity groups like SWE, NSBE, SHIP, ACES, all of those SACE, they are really great for that. I'm the NSBE advisor at my school. I was never in SWE or NSBE in undergrad. I honestly think if I had have been, it would have made a difference, because right now, I'm as the NSBE advisor, I know some of my students, that is their anchor. That is their connection to their major to their community, to their support network, etc. And it would have made a big difference for me as well.
Yeah, I love that. I did not know that. So see, unprompted, we talked about the importance of the network and just
Absolutely.
having that community of support. We all need it, whether we're the only or not. It's just so
Absolutely.
important, I think, especially as women, to have that community of support.
You do. You sometimes feel like, am I going crazy? Nobody else. Did you hear that? Has anybody else experienced that? And when you go to those affinity groups, you're like, honey, everybody has heard that statement. Everybody has been assigned to be the secretary on the team, and you have to tell the boys, no, I'm not going to take notes. I'm going to do the technical work just like you. But when you don't go to those groups, you're sometimes thinking, is it just me? Am I crazy?
Or the professor that says you're just there to find a husband.
Oh,
Sir, I think if I were just here to find a husband, I'd pick something a little easier than engineering.
absolutely, absolutely. Or I was bad for this one. I only have my classes only have 30 students. Being called by the only other girl in the class's name, and you have to be like, we don't even look alike. Can you pay attention, please?
Yeah, it's those little things,
Yeah.
right, that make you feel like you don't belong.
Yeah.
But yet you persisted and in an amazing way.
Thank you. So, Karen, under your leadership, SWE has expanded internationally and grown its influence to nearly 50,000 members. What do you consider your most significant accomplishments in your time with SWE, and what impact do you hope to leave on the organization?
Oh, I love this question. So there's a couple things that I'm really proud of under my leadership. One is our growth of membership. I mean, the fact, that we are able to have so many more women be part of the network. And I think of it of the old commercial of, I told two friends and so on and so on and so on. So for every member that's out there, I just think of how many more women, how many girls we're impacting because they're part of the SWE community. When I first joined SWE, I said, boy, I'm going to be out of a job soon because we're going to get to parity so fast, right? This is an amazing organization. I'm excited about the mission. And yet here we are, 14, 15% of the engineering workforce. So still a lot of work to do. But to me, that membership growth just says we are moving in the right direction. And I'm hoping that needle is going to start to move faster because the community is just that much larger. And we're influencing institutions and employer partners in a way we've never been able to before because our numbers are just so strong. Then there's our growing events, right? I mean, 20,000 people coming to a SWE conference. I remember when my predecessor was asked by some employer partners, how big did we think the SWE conference could get to? And I jumped in and said 10,000. And after the meeting, she said, 10,000. Oh my God, why would you set the expectation that high? And now here we are, long having blown past 10,000. And, now I think, 20,000. Okay, when do we get to 25,000? When do we have to take over the whole entire city? Like some of the really big medical conferences, for instance, I think it's totally reachable. And then the global footprint, that's my other. Some of the work we're doing in India this past year at the SWE conference in Bengaluru, women coming up to me at the end saying, thank you so much for bringing SWE to us. We didn't know how much we needed this network until we experienced it. And that's when you're like, the long days, the weekends, the sleepless nights are so worth it because you're seeing the mission in action. You're seeing the impact that we're having to the profession, to the women that are in the profession, and hopefully to those that are coming behind the women that are engaged with us right now.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss if I did not take this moment to thank you again. I was the Distinguished Engineering Educator for SWE in 2022. And that was in New Orleans, I believe. And I wasn't unfortunately able to make it to the next year. And I was at work in class and my phone was just going crazy because I had been put on the side of the building in Los Angeles, the convention center, They had taken my picture the year before when I won the award. So I have to thank you for that. And getting things like that is so important because sometimes I feel like, like you said, being one of only a few, you feel like you're a voice in the wilderness. And like, does anybody hear me? Do they know how important this is? So being recognized by your organization was really an honor.
Yeah. Well, two things you pointed out. One, our awards. We've even expanded our awards now so that really at every career stage, we're able to recognize. So, engineering educator, that's kind of one of our pinnacle apex awards. But we want to have awards, when you're first starting out or when you're mid-career, and then certainly those pinnacle of career. But we want to draw attention to the accomplishments of women in the profession. As you said, you're here, you're making a difference. And so, SWE, part of our mission is really to showcase those accomplishments. And then we feature actual members in all of our marketing because we want people to see themselves in SWE, that we are inclusive and that there is a place for them. And so if they're a woman of color, maybe they're part of SHIP or ACES or NSBE or SACE, but they also have a place within SWE. And so that intersectionality, that there's a place with that within the organization. But like, if you ever thought you were going to see yourself on a billboard, you have now, right?
Absolutely. And I one of the things I say to people is you can be what you cannot see, but it's a whole lot easier when you can see what you can be. I like to say Mae Jemison was the only Black woman engineer I could ever think about or remember when I was younger. So when people say, well, who were your role models when you were little? I don't think I had any. It was later that I learned about Mae Jemison. So you're right. Having that visibility is so important. Walking around the SWE conference and seeing those images that look like you and you're like, hey, I can do this too. I think that's so wonderful.
It's like, I belong here.
Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna switch the conversation a little bit to leadership, and I know we're for those at home, we're skipping around our script a little bit, but it feels right. So let's dive into leadership and sort of success and how that evolves with age and experience. And thank you to Forbes because they actually publish our age next to that. So I said, well, I guess there's no hiding my age anymore because it's out there in the domain for everyone. But kind of talk about your perspective on leadership and success and maybe how that's evolved over time.
So interestingly, you should say that. One of the things I tweeted after I found out I got this, because I have no idea how they found me, is I tweeted, if I had known how impactful I would be in my 50s, I would not have stressed so in my 20s and 30s and 40s about my career. Because what I found was that when I started to just trust myself and move in a way that felt authentic to me, then everything started to fall in place. It's kind of like that whole, if you build it, they will come. A big one for me and a lot of people probably was the pandemic. I was on sabbatical. I was sitting at home because my sabbatical company had quarantined like everywhere else. And I'm stuck, and then some social media things happen, some social justice things happen. I started my business. I co-founded Black in Engineering and Black in Robotics. I stepped back to reflect on my career and the way that I was doing engineering and being an engineering academic. I had talked about how I wanted it to be different than my experience at Georgia Tech. That's when I started writing the children's books, the romance novels, making hip hop slam poetry on YouTube, because I said, if my STEM is going to be for the streets, that means the real streets, not the streets of my students who pay that high price tuition in the classroom. I had to move beyond just being the sage on the stage or at the conference or in the journal. And I had to be the sage on the stage, on the world stage. And I think that made a big difference. And I turned 50 in 2020. So literally right after I turned 50, I had to make a decision that I could no longer be afraid to speak on things that I felt were important or move in ways that people did not expect me to move in non-traditional ways. And once I did that, I found people were hungry for that. I moved from my students going, you're not like my other professors, to people like, in general, you're not like a PhD or any professor I've ever met. Well, good. Then that means I'm doing it right. And if I'm getting you interested in robotics or interested in engineering or interested in what I'm doing, then that is the way that I need to move.
Yeah. I would describe my 50s. So last year we had a keynote speaker at SWE, Kate Maxwell, and one of her quotes was, "Be brave, not fearless."
Mm.
And I feel like that's been my 50s. That,
Yeah.
to the authentic point that you mentioned, that I'm doing what I think is right for the organization in a way that feels authentic to me. And I'm being brave. I'm helping the organization take risks. I'm not without fear, right? There's always some fear when you're taking risks, or like you said, you're not doing it like everybody else. How's that going to land? But if you're brave and you do what feels like the right thing to you, I just feel like you can't go wrong. Once I
Absolutely.
stopped worrying about what other people thought,
Yeah.
or if I was doing it the way I had seen other people do it, which often didn't feel very authentic, right? Like, who wants to follow someone who's not being authentic?
Yeah.
Nobody. They want to follow somebody who has the belief in what they're doing and is being true to their value system. And so for me, I don't know, like in my 50s, it's just been so freeing
Yes.
to let some of those you know, wanting to fit in, like those feelings of not wanting to be different. Like you said, like I want to be different. I want to do it the way that feels right to me. And I think with age, you get more comfortable with your authentic self.
You're exactly right. My mindset used to be, I'll do it after I get tenure, after I get full professor, after I get endowed chair, after I retire. Or I used to always be like, God, I can't wait till I'm a little old lady and I can just say whatever I want. If you think about it, like Rose from Golden Girls, I can't wait. And at some point I had to be like, I can't wait till then because the stuff that I'm doing is too important. And there can be no more after. After has now become now. If I think it's important, it needs to be done now, not
But
after something else happens.
because after we won't have the influence. And that's what's so important,
Yeah.
right? If we're going to change the numbers, if we're going to impact the profession, if we're going to bring along that next generation, we got to be doing it now while we have the stage versus when we've stepped aside. Because I'm not quite ready to step aside.
Yes, that's
So
good.
you touched a little bit on the novels and the romance novels, Black characters, all in the STEM fields.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that whole thing. And how do you see fiction as a vehicle for diversity in STEM?
I see fiction as a way of proselytizing things that I think are absolutely amazing and so important. And I was working with some colleagues, other Black women professors, and we were like, God, we really just think engineering has a marketing problem. One of the reasons we work so hard and need to get more young people involved is because there's these whole stereotypes about what they are and what it is not. And having, young girls know, hey, you can love dolls. I love Barbies when I was little. You can love sewing, you can love drawing and art and still be an engineer. So by doing that, we have to find a way to put it in their hands in a non-traditional way. Robotics competitions are great. Electronics and coding clubs are great. But you want to also hook in that young lady who loves to just read a good book, right? And so my books are probably high school level and above, but I also write children's books. But the whole conversation started with, how can we market our field to people in a way that does not feel like they're being preached to or shoved down their throat, or because we also know young ladies sometimes don't like being on competition teams. They're a little uncomfortable with the aggressiveness of let's make battle bots and robots that are going to war and So my books are a way to show a young lady living her everyday life, excelling at STEM. One of them is about a robotics engineer. She's in grad school. Her thesis advisor's being a little hard on her about not getting distracted, staying in the lab. And then she meets a wonderful distraction in the form of a firefighter. And they start dating, and she's trying to balance her personal and professional life. And also showing some of the challenges that we sometimes have to face as women in STEM, having a challenging career, but also saying, no, I want to have this relationship and I want to be able to have, that thriving work-life balance. So that's what all my books are about. The second one is actually a nurse. And both books have firefighters, and I call them the first responder fairy tales. And I told somebody, I think STEM professionals are also first responders. We design the system solutions and processes that are going to improve the world. So first responder fairy tales is kind of a play on words because everyone thinks it's about the firefighters, but it's really about the women in STEM, and the fact that we impact society and we change lives as well in the work that we do.
Yeah. I mean, most folks couldn't do the work they do. Physicians and surgeons, how
Mhm.
much of that is biomedical engineering and medical devices? And yes, we need the trained professionals then to use those tools, but it's engineers that are creating all those things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I love this, authentic role models. We talk with our members about that all the time. When you are out there talking with young girls who are maybe thinking about STEM but are a little afraid, to talk about your real life, to talk about, your family or your relationships, or that, yes, you can study engineering, have a boyfriend, and do yoga, right?
Yeah.
Like you can have this fully
Right.
integrated life. It's not an either
Yeah.
or.
Yeah.
And,
I did a Girl Scouts event, and we talked a little bit about sewing and crafting and STEAM, the intersections of art and STEM, such as robots that can draw, robots that can sing, robots that can dance, wearable technologies. In fact, some people are putting electronics in their clothes now. And I was in the airport. I don't even remember any of the little girls. It was a 30-minute conversation. And I was in the airport and I had a dad run up to me and he goes, "Didn't you do the Girl Scouts thing yesterday with the little girls?" He said, "Yeah." And I told him it was me. He said, "Thank you for mentioning the arts and the sewing." He said, "My daughter sews and she's about 8 years old, and she came home and she was so excited to hear that even though she sewed, she could be an engineer." Because I think I had mentioned that one of my first creative hobbies was sewing dresses for my Barbies. So when parents ask me how to make an engineer or get my kid into STEM, have them creating around their house. You don't have to buy an expensive robot or a kit. Have them take a pin apart and figure out how to put it back together.
yeah,
Figure out something they want to make better about a toy and help them figure out how to do that. So that's just a big part. You're right. Parents don't know that either. They think they've got to enroll their kids in Code Academy or something. No, just help them to foster their creativity, their curiosity.
yep.
That's
It's
it.
all about the creativity and curiosity, fostering that inquisitive mindset.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah, I love robotics. I'm on the board of First Robotics, and going to the championships and going down to the pits.
Mhm.
It's interesting because the last few years my husband's come with me. And so I'll say, well, I'm going to go down to the pits. And he's like, oh, no, I want to come. And so I'll often go visit some of the teams that SWE supports and that either are all girls or have a lot of girls. And they're always like, wow, your husband's interested in what you do. And
Yeah.
it's like, yeah, you can be married to somebody who's interested and supportive of your career. In fact, your partner might be one of the most important choices you make because you want somebody that's going to be supportive of your career, whatever that relationship might look like. You want to have that support or support from family or whoever is part of your network should be supporting your STEM pursuits.
Even if they don't totally understand it. I was a first judge and judge advisor for about 18 years. And I didn't understand first when I first started, because the first year they asked me, I'm thinking America's Got Talent. I'm thinking I'm going to be sitting on a stage and kids are going to drive by with a robot and I'm going to score it 8 out of 10 or whatever. But you're right. That pits experience was authentic for me. And one of the things I look for when I walk through the pits is, where are your young women if they don't have any? And if they do, I need to know that they have their heads in the robot as much as the boys. They're not just marketing. They're not passing out pamphlets or flyers at the front of the pit. And if they are, let's talk about how to get your head in that robot.
Yep.
Because what we find is those kids end up being extremely successful in engineering school as well, because they've had those experiences from high school.
Yeah. And as Dean Kamen likes to say, it is the one sport where everyone can go pro.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep. So as we start to wrap up, I do want to focus on the 50 over 50. What message do you have for women who might feel like time has passed or that the opportunities are only for the younger generation?
I think I'm a testament to the fact that it's never too late. One of the things I did not mention is that at the time when I was at Georgia Tech and I had decided I was going to get my PhD and become an engineering professor because I just didn't like the way it was being presented or the way that I was being taught, I had a 2.5 and had failed 2 classes. There was no way I was going to get into anyone's graduate school with those grades and with that resume. And so I went to work at Ford Motor Company in Detroit Edison in Michigan. I worked as a controls engineer. I found a professor at Wayne State who was willing to take a chance on me and give me a full fellowship. And I knew that this was my last opportunity to achieve my goal. And I got a 4.0 in grad school because I needed people to look at that and not my undergraduate grades. And from there, I was able to springboard that into my PhD program at Vanderbilt. But because I had to delay in order to figure out my life path, I didn't even get my PhD until 33. So that was the start of my journey to tenure and all of that. And it took me 9 years to get tenure because I went to 2 different schools. So I think the message I have is it's never too late and to trust yourself. Just recently, I shared with someone when I was in high school, I had a principal who would always walk by and say, I need you to lift your head up. I need you to lift your head up because I was shy, I was introverted, and I always walked with my head looking at my feet, looking down. And I think that's it. Lift your head up, look at yourself in the mirror, and trust that you know. The things that I do now that get me awards and recognitions and attention, I could have done this 10 years ago. But 10 years ago, I thought, this is not that interesting. No one would be interested in me. And why would anybody care about this stuff? So trust yourself and know that if you think it's good, somebody else will too. And to move forward with your head up.
Yeah, I agree. It's never too late. And again, I think it goes back to what we were talking about, that confidence and authenticity. You know, own your goals, own your accomplishments. I have a former colleague who used to always say, it's not bragging if you've done it. And he would say, I get so frustrated. He said, talk about your accomplishments. He would say, I tell my wife the same thing, talk about your accomplishments. You've done it, own it. And that's the other thing I would say, don't be afraid to be your biggest advocate, right? If you've done it or there's something you want to go after, don't be afraid to talk about it. Don't be afraid to let people who could have some influence in what you want to do know that you have these goals and that it's okay to pursue them. They say women, when they see a job opportunity, if they don't have 110% of what they're looking for, they won't apply. Or we think we need another degree or another certificate or another assignment before we go for something like that. Just go for it. I look back early on in my career and there were times I did go for it. And I wouldn't be here today if I wouldn't have taken a risk and said, what I don't know, I'll figure out along the way.
That really, literally just recently happened to me. I have been invited to be the expert witness on a trial. And I turned down the invitation 3 different times. And the head attorney was a woman. And she reached out to me and she goes, I want you. And I said, I don't want to do it. I've read it over. She said, you don't understand. I ask men, and when I ask men, they'll meet 50% of the criteria and they will do it absolutely. You're over here and you 100% match what we're looking for. And you have told me no 3 times. And I was like, okay, yes, I will do it. But you're exactly right, because it's like, I don't think that's not me.
Well, I would love to have a follow-up conversation with you about your experience as an expert witness.
Absolutely. This is my first time. The trial is coming up in about a month.
Okay.
Something else that came out of the pandemic. To this day, I'm still not sure how she found me, but she's just like, you are perfect. You meet the criteria to a T, and you keep telling me no.
Well, I know it's we have so many subject matter experts. So seriously, we are going to have a follow-up conversation post-trial and you will share your experience, because I think we have a lot of members who can serve in this capacity.
Yes, that's exactly what they told me. Is they said, we would like to start seeing a more diverse set of people on the witness stand, because we think it resonates more with the jurors if, they don't all just look like one cookie cutter type.
I agree. All right. Well, excellent. I'm glad you've agreed to do it. That's exciting.
Thank you.
Like a whole nother chapter, a whole nother layer to
I
Dr.
know.
Carlotta.
I
Okay.
gotta write this autobiography. It's getting really long.
I second that.
Yeah.
So let's wrap up with what's the one thing you're most proud of?
I think for me, it was stepping out on faith and starting my company. NoireSTEMinist Educational Consulting was started in 2021. And it was because during the pandemic, when I had the Jerry Maguire moment and I started being more visible on social media and more vocal about things that I valued, I started getting contacted a lot to do keynote speaks, to do workshops, to teach robotics. And a lot of people wanted me to do it for free. And I started to have I am all about service and outreach, but we all know that women and people of color are asked to do way more service than anyone else. And I had to step back and go, my intellectual property and my 23 years of education are worth something. And I have to start to reward myself for that. So I launched my business as a framework for people to reach out to me to get some of the things that I was doing for free, but not anymore. And I think that was I would have never thought I would be an entrepreneur or a business owner. And I think that probably was what got the visibility of the Forbes 50 over 50. So I'm glad I did that.
Yeah, knowing your worth. Isn't that
Yes,
what their
exactly.
tagline is? Knowing your worth.
That's exactly right.
Exactly. Yeah.
Exactly.
I think for me, it's just the way SWE has grown and expanded. You know, we've got an amazing team. When I started, we had about 3 of us on staff. We now have over 50. And we really are supporting women that entire career cycle from, you know, they're in middle school and high school first thinking about STEM all the way through retirement. And so for me, just to be part of that community and knowing I had a hand in growing that to what it is and what, you know, we're celebrating our 75th anniversary next year.
Wow.
And to think that what we've got today, what it might be in another 75 years, and to have been part of that, I'm just so proud. And the fact that Forbes recognized that growth and innovation, it's sort of that why I jump up in the morning and get out of bed and do the work, because I always tell younger people considering working for a professional association that, you know, increasing shareholder return is great, but working for an organization where you see the mission in action, I don't know of any greater pursuits in life, and being able to have such a positive impact. I'm proud
Absolutely. Doing the work that matters.
doing the work that
I
matters.
told some students one time that I said, I love my job. And if I didn't have bills, I would do it for free. And if I was doing anything else and I didn't feel like that, then I wasn't in the right place.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. Well, this has been so much fun.
Yes.
I've loved it. I wish we had many more hours to talk. I feel like we're sitting in my living room just having
Yes.
a conversation and
Thank
sharing.
you.
But we are going to have that follow-up conversation about being an expert witness.
Absolutely. I can
My
tell you the
team in the
goods and the bad.
background has heard your commitment, so we will do that.
Thank you. Thank you for
But
having me.
I'm going to wrap us up. And so for all of us here at SWE, a big thank you to Carlotta, and a big thank you to all of our listeners. And with that, we will wrap up here at Diverse. Thank you.